Hey, Wellness Warriors, welcome to the Burnout Resolution Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. I've been living and learning the practice of medicine for over 25 years now, and I've had the privilege of walking along with my clients on their journey to well-being. I was blessed to realize very early in my medical career that the stuff we learned in medical school and practiced in our residency training just wasn't going to cut it for my clients. While what I learned was great for life-threatening emergencies, they weren't so good for everyday situations that people encounter, like fatigue, exhaustion, and burnout. I quickly became acutely aware that I had to dive deep back into studying things from different angles and different perspectives. That led me to traditional Chinese medicine, which to this day I believe is a very powerful system of medicine that really complements our more allopathic or conventional medical model if we look at it from the right angles. And then there's functional medicine, which I also studied, incorporated into my practice with great success. I was able to walk alongside my clients, really listen to them and hear what they were saying. They were saying a lot of the same things. I'm exhausted, I'm gaining weight and I can't lose it. I don't feel well in general. I can't quite describe how I feel. I just don't feel good. I don't think I should feel this way. I sleep 8, 9 hours. I don't feel a whole lot better when I get up in the morning. My mood is all over the place. I'm easily triggered and annoyed. I feel like socializing is a chore. Getting up to go to work is not a joyful experience for me. I kept hearing the same story, said in different ways, using different words, but it was always the same. What I came to realize is that burnout resolution is an inside job. So while I could write prescriptions for antidepressants or birth control pills to regulate people's moods around their cycles, or give them prescriptions for things to improve their focus artificially, I wasn't treating the actual root causes, or I wasn't guiding them to understand the actual root causes of their fatigue and burnout. In functional medicine, we use supplements quite a bit. So in today's podcast, we're going to dive deep into supplements and why the landscape on supplements is such a minefield. Studies have been coming out on vitamins and minerals and supplements to claim that they're not valuable, they don't reduce the risk of disease, they don't help with mood disorders, they don't help prevent heart disease. Well, I'm here to debunk these myths and guide you to diving deep into the supplement minefield to figure it all out. The number one thing to know is something that I figured out early on in my career is that the way we study things isn't very good. So we have a deeply flawed medical study algorithm that we're using. The gold standard that we learned to use was a randomized controlled trial. A way to see this is that we randomly pick people and we separate them into two groups, right? A trial group and a what we call a control group. So one group is going to get a treatment. The other group is going to think they're getting a treatment but not actually get that treatment. And then we, as the person doing the study, are blinded. We don't know which group is getting the treatment and which isn't. And that's the gold standard, right? And so then we apply that, for example, if we're looking at a blood pressure medication. Half of the people in the study will get the blood pressure medication, and half of the people in the study will get like a sugar pill or something they think is the blood pressure medication. And the doctor doing the studies or the PhD students, the PhDs doing the studies, won't know which people are getting the drugs and which are not. That way we're blinded, right? So the patient participating in the study is blinded. They don't know if they're getting the blood pressure medication or not. And we're blinded. We don't know if they're getting the medication or not. That is supposed to take all the bias out of the study. And then we look at the results. So at the end of the study, for example, if it's 3 or 6 months, we look at the results and then we get unblinded. So we get to know which of the people in the study got the blood pressure meds and which of them got the sugar pill, for example, and then we see what the results were. That's supposed to allow us to see if the blood pressure medication is effective in lowering blood pressure or not. And that was our gold standard. And that still is our gold standard to this day. Well, now studies are coming out on these studies to show, especially in the case of vitamins and minerals and supplements, that that type of a study is flawed. The reason for that is we're not robots. There are so many other variables in our lives that, for example, control our blood pressure, right? How much stress we have in our lives, what other medications we might be taking, our diet, our sleep habits, how we breathe even has to do with blood pressure. And so there's no real way to control for those things. And so we make a lot of assumptions when we do medical studies that all those things are controlled and are not factors, when in fact they are, right? There's no way to tease those things out. And so when we get the results of the study, we're not really getting the results of the study. We're also getting all of the other bias points that go into the study that we were not looking at. There was a study done by Doctors Morris, and controlled trials for vitamins and minerals were not helpful. They cited several reasons for this, one of which was these studies tend to recruit generally healthy people already. And so if you don't have a lot of vitamin and mineral deficiencies, taking vitamins and minerals won't help you, right? And so what they realized is that there were biases in the selection process of the participants of the study. The other types of biases that we see in these types of studies is, for example, the Women's Health Initiative back in the early 2000s had a fat intake arm of their study. And there was a lot of what they call recall bias. In other words, the women who were participating in the studies were being asked to remember how much fat they consumed. And so they were not actually marking down their fat consumption over time. They were being asked to recall based on their memory. And they overestimated how much fat they were taking in, which again diluted the effect of the study. The other factor we're realizing is the vast majority of studies on nutrients don't actually measure the nutrient levels in the participants of the studies. And so it is assumed that a vitamin can be given to that person and that we should see the effect of the vitamin. Well, if that vitamin is not deficient in that individual, you're not going to see the effect of the vitamin, right? That's just common sense. But unfortunately, when we construct and design our medical studies, we don't look at these kind of basic things, frankly. There was a study in 2011 again that suggested that vitamin E was toxic and caused an increased risk of prostate cancer. When we go back and we look at that study, if we go and we look at the structure of the vitamin E that was studied in that particular medical study, we'll see that it was actually artificial vitamin E and not natural vitamin E. Vitamin E comes in 9 different forms. And so when you isolate one form and you synthesize it, you make it artificial, you change its structure, you're going to automatically imbalance all the other forms. And what was determined later by other studies is that when you use this specific artificial vitamin E, you actually induce a vitamin A deficiency. Again, none of this was disclosed in the study. The conclusion was simply vitamin E causes cancer. The reality is vitamin E does not cause cancer. In fact, vitamin E and many other nutrients and supplements actually help to prevent diseases. But if we don't study them properly, we won't ever see that in the mainstream medical literature. In order to find studies on vitamins, I had to go to nutrition journals instead of medical journals. I had to go to veterinarian journals instead of human journals to see like what's going on in these other fields and do they have these similar selection biases when they do their studies. And I was able to find some pretty solid studies on actually horses to show that supplementing them helped their endurance. And again, nutrition journals will show us the difference between using artificial vitamins and natural vitamins, and that really matters. The problem is that the supplement industry is unregulated, and so there is no regulation, no law in the books that forces the manufacturers of these vitamins and minerals to tell you if you're getting natural vitamins or artificial vitamins. And in fact, you can actually go and look at this study for yourself and see that they actually used a synthetic or artificial form of vitamin E. And so they did not use a natural form of vitamin E, which earlier studies showed helped reduce the risk of prostate cancer. And so these things are not disclosed in our medical studies, leading us down the wrong path. So clearly, if you use an artificial vitamin, just like if you use an artificial hormone, you're going to run into trouble, right? We've done the studies on the artificial hormones now enough to know that after using them for a few years, we're actually increasing our risk of cancer and stroke. Whereas with natural hormones, we don't see those risks. The same applies to vitamins and minerals. So if we're using an artificial form of a vitamin, it only makes sense that after a few years or maybe even a few months, depending on your personal risk and other factors, you might be increasing your risk of cancer and other medical conditions. So number one is you got to know if the study is using artificial ingredients or natural ingredients, and looking at the label will not tell you. You actually have to go to the study itself and look at the chemical structure of the substance that they're studying, compare it to the natural substance, and make sure that it's literally the same in all positions of its chemical structure. And if you were to do that with the SELECT study, you'll see that there are a few positions on that vitamin E that are not natural. And therein lies the problem. The difference between a potential cancer diagnosis using a supplement versus the avoidance of a cancer diagnosis using a more natural substance. In medical school, we were taught to ignore that. We were taught that they were all the same and that just changing a couple little positions in a chemical structure wouldn't make much of a difference. And now the studies are piling up to show us that that just was not true. The second flaw in our studies is that we don't measure the nutrient levels before and after we do the study. We just kind of make the assumption that if we give someone a vitamin, they should have a particular effect from that vitamin. But the reality is, if you don't need it, you're not going to see the effect of it, right? Because your body is just going to urinate it out, right? If we don't need something, our body just naturally gets rid of it. And so it stands to reason that we should measure the levels first, the before and the after. Then we can also see the clinical picture that evolves from the increase of the levels from a deficiency state to a normal state. But that's not what we do in our medical studies. And this is what Morris and Tangney showed in their 2011 study, is that we have a bias to who we put in these studies, and they are already fairly healthy and eating a decent diet. And then we blame the multivitamin for not meeting our study goal. And the third flaw is we don't see the potentially thousands of other factors that have to do with disease risk. And there really is no way to do that, right? There is no logical way to look at the interior of someone's body to know all of the potential risks, what genes they have or don't have, what genes are being activated, not activated, what their diet is, right? Like trying to just source out someone's diet, how much of their food has pesticides on it, how much of their foods have artificial ingredients in them, how much of their food is natural. There's no way to parse those things out. And so it's nearly impossible to actually control in a randomized controlled trial, which is our gold standard. Now, if we were robots and we were all of the same design and software, then yes, we could control, but we're not robots. And then the other flaw that we have is even when we do measure the levels of nutrients within someone's body, we do it in the wrong way. So again, we use the standard of blood work to find out what vitamin and mineral deficiencies someone has, and then we're led to believe that people don't really have vitamin and mineral deficiencies, when in fact they do. And our CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, if you go to their website and you look this up, you'll see that they state that about 10% of people living in the US have vitamin and mineral deficiencies. And that's just not true. In fact, I would say maybe 10% don't have vitamin and mineral deficiencies. So why are we being so misled, right? Is it some conspiracy? The answer is not really, right? We made a lot of assumptions. We made the assumption that blood work was the gold standard. Why? Because it's easy to access, right? But that doesn't make something a gold standard. Just because it's easy to get to doesn't mean it's reliable. But we made this assumption in the medical field, and we've been running with it for over 100 years. The truth is that blood work just does not show most vitamin and mineral deficiencies. So when your blood work comes back normal, that doesn't mean that the inside of your cells are normal. And in fact, it's the inside of your cells that matter the most. So when we look at blood work, what are we looking at, right? We're looking at what is circulating in your body, what's going from one group of cells or tissues to another group of cells and tissues. Where those vitamins and minerals actually function is inside of those cells and tissues. So if we're not looking there for the vitamin and mineral deficiencies, we're not going to find them because what's in transit is actually normalized. The blood work is a normalized environment. And that's done on purpose by your body in order for it to adapt and not die under stressful conditions. So our body is really well equipped to make sure that it adapts very well in times of stress, in times of having nutrient deficiencies, right? So inevitably at some point in time in people's lives, they won't be properly nourished. They won't have the right vitamins and minerals on board. That dates back to hundreds of thousands of years, right? When we were hunter-gatherers, and there might be long extended periods of time where we may not get adequate food. So our bodies evolved in that way to be very, very adaptable. One of the ways it adapts the most is through who it feeds and who it doesn't feed, right? So your body is really good at putting itself on this food chain. When it perceives it's missing things, when it perceives it's in starvation, when it perceives there are nutrient deficiencies. In other words, it doesn't have enough to evenly distribute to all the cells. It will start to ration its resources, right? It will put itself on a food chain. It'll make sure that your heart and lungs have what they need, and it will kind of skimp on hair follicles, skin cells, the musculoskeletal tissues. If those gaps get wider and wider, if there's more and more starvation and more supply-demand mismatches, then other systems will not get what they need. Those are usually in the abdomen. So we're talking about the liver, the gallbladder, the gastrointestinal system, the reproductive organs, your immune system in general, even your brain. Your brain is not top priority to your body. It's kind of in the middle. And this is how we lose our ability to store memory and executive function. This is where dementia might set in. This is where ADHD might set in. Even mood disorders, right? If the gastrointestinal system and the brain is not getting what it needs, then we can easily see how these diseases and conditions can kind of creep into the picture. The reason that your body is doing that is because it knows it needs to beat your heart and allow your lungs to breathe for you to stay alive. So it will prefer to skimp on what it thinks are less important systems to the extent to which it must. So if you have a severe vitamin D deficiency, which is all too common, we see that a lot, that's actually one of the nutrients that is actually quite accurate in blood work. But the vast majority of the other nutrients aren't, and we'll talk about this in a moment. But let's say you have a severe vitamin D deficiency. Your body will know, I better get this to my heart and lungs, and then trickle down from there, right? Whatever is left over trickles down by order of importance. So skin cells, hair follicles may not get their share of vitamin D, and we may see symptoms develop as a result of that. So we may see things like rashes. We may see hair dulling, thinning, hair loss. We may see itchy skin, dry skin, delayed wound healing, not healing properly when you get a cut. These can all be potentially vitamin D deficiency manifestations, just in your hair and skin alone. And usually vitamin and mineral deficiencies don't happen in isolated fashion. It's not usually just a vitamin D deficiency. And I see this a lot in my clients. They'll get blood work and all of the rest of the vitamins and minerals that were tested for are normal, but the vitamin D is low. But if we were to do the studies properly and actually look inside the cells, so in this case, we tend to look at the immune cells because they are easily accessible with your blood work. But it's not blood work that we're getting, right? So we draw the blood, we send it to the lab, and then at the lab, they extract white blood cells or immune cells called lymphocytes out of the bloodstream, and they actually test the inside of them for 31 different nutrients. And time again, what we see is this huge mismatch between what the person's blood work showed and what the inside of their immune cells are actually showing. And again, this is because your body is intelligent and it understands. I would rather skimp on an immune cell than not have my heart beat and my lungs breathe, right? Because those nutrient deficiencies manifesting in the heart and lungs would be deadly, whereas those vitamin deficiencies manifesting in your hair and skin and musculoskeletal system, maybe even in your liver, your immune cells, is not immediately deadly, right? It's not healthy, but it's not immediately deadly. So your body is extremely intelligent in the way that it distributes nutrients. So if we really want to know what's going on, we have to look inside the cells. And studies just don't look at these things. Now, we have enough studies to show that we should be looking in other places for vitamin and mineral deficiencies, but still, we don't use them uniformly when we do studies on vitamin and mineral deficiencies. And so this leads us to believe that supplements and even good nutrition is not useful. I still have clients when they come to me, they say, my last doctor said it doesn't matter what I eat as much. And it's just simply not true. And the same applies for supplements. So there are studies to show, for example, that what we call RBC magnesium is much more sensitive for magnesium deficiency than regular plasma or serum levels of magnesium. RBC stands for red blood cell. So instead of the white blood cell, in this case, they take out the red blood cell and they look for the magnesium level in those cells. So it's a cellular level test. And time again, we see that the levels inside the red blood cells are going to be lower than the levels floating around in the bloodstream. Because again, your body knows I got to get this magnesium to my heart, right? So it'll skimp on the red blood cell getting the magnesium, but not the heart, because it's super intelligent. So we have to respect how our body functions and look in the areas that are going to give us the most information. And in my 20 years of experience and growing with my clients, I've learned to make sure that I look at their cellular levels of nutrients to really get a sense of why they have their symptoms of burnout. Because if we keep using the bloodstream, we'll keep getting misled. We'll keep thinking everything's okay when it's not. And this is when people start to think that it's psychological, that maybe they're just making things up. It's in their head, right? It's really not. It's a physiological thing that might be affecting your mood and how you're thinking, but you can't separate the two. They are one and the same. So again, this is where these medical trials, these medical studies lead us astray and lead us into these dead ends that don't help us to feel better. So what other factors make it so hard to study supplements? One of the main reasons is because supplements are not regulated. And regulation has its pluses and its minuses, right? Generally, regulation means that things are going to be safer for us. And a lot of supplement critics cite the idea that there are contaminants and artificial ingredients in supplements and toxins in supplements, and that we should just simply not use them. But even in a regulated industry like the pharmaceutical industry, which is regulated by the FDA, we see those same toxins. We see heavy metals there. We see toxins, artificial ingredients, toxic fillers in even the regulated pharmaceutical drugs. So how do we figure this out, right? It's a minefield no matter how we look at it. The regulated industry has toxic stuff in it. The unregulated industry has toxic stuff in it. So your best bet is to partner with an integrative or functional medical doctor who can guide you with the right manufacturers of these supplements and also guide you in proper testing to know whether or not you need the vitamins and minerals or other supplements. Now, how can you quickly figure out if a supplement is safe for you or not? One easy way is to make sure that most of the ingredients, and preferably all of the ingredients, are organic or natural. Now, again, we already talked about this because it's unregulated. They don't have the legal requirement to tell you if the ingredients are artificial or natural. So there are many popular over-the-counter vitamins and minerals that contain artificial ingredients, and yet it still says vitamin E on the label. So the quickest way, again, is to see what are functional and integrative medical doctors recommending to their clients. What brands do they tend to partner with? The reason that matters is because you can kind of go behind the scenes of the manufacturer and look at what is their stuff sourced from. What is their vitamin E sourced from? Artificial vitamin E is literally sourced from petroleum, the stuff that we run our cars off of, whereas natural vitamin E is from wheat germ and natural products. So we get to kind of go behind the scenes of the manufacturers and see what are they sourcing these nutrients from. You can also do that by calling the manufacturer and asking. They should be able to send you a printout of information as to where the ingredients on their labels are coming from. The other issue with supplements and what makes it a minefield is because it's unregulated, again, you don't get to know if what's on the label is actually what's in the capsule. And now we have quite a few studies to show that not every manufacturer is actually putting in the capsule what is on the label. And so an integrative functional medical doctor who does cellular-based testing can see the before and after of you having taken the supplement to know if it's actually working. So over the course of time, in my case, 20 years, 20 plus at this point, and doing cellular-based testing, I get to see the before and the after picture when I use supplements. So I get to know, where is that supplement coming from? Where'd you get the ingredients? And are these supplements actually correcting the deficiencies that I'm finding in my clients, right? So the testing, the proof is in the testing. That's the study. The study is, I had symptom A, B, and C, and my test showed X, Y, and Z deficiency. I took the specified supplements that were safe and had accurate labeling, and my subsequent test showed correction of X, Y, and Z deficiency, and symptom A, B, and C are now gone, right? That's the study. It's not a huge randomized controlled trial. It's in every single client. What's the before and the after? Not just for their symptoms, because we can mask symptoms. We can easily mask symptoms. Birth control pills will easily mask symptoms of heavy menstrual cycles, painful menstrual cycles, but they're not treating the root cause, which is why when you take the birth control pill away, for example, if someone wants to conceive and have children now, and they want to stop their birth control pill, if they had polycystic ovarian syndrome or if they had endometriosis, they didn't have the symptoms of those conditions. But once they take the birth control pill away, those symptoms and conditions come back, and their fertility is still being impacted by these conditions because the root causes were not corrected, right? So we want to correct the root causes, and then we should be able to take the nutrients away once those are corrected and that person's eating habits are better, right? They're not getting the vitamin and mineral deficiencies anymore if they're absorbing properly. So again, this is why the actual individual testing is so important, right? Because if you are known to have, for example, a vitamin D deficiency, a vitamin A deficiency, and a magnesium deficiency, for example, and you're prescribed those things, not only should the symptoms of those deficiencies have gone away, but we should see that the repeat testing that we usually do in about 9 months to 12 months shows that those deficiencies are resolved by having taken the supplements. So we get to see the before, the after. But if we see that the vitamin D deficiency is still there, or the vitamin E deficiency is still there, and you're taking a reliable supplement at the correct dose, and we still don't see the cellular levels coming up, well, there's only one reason for, well, two potentially. Either you're not taking them, right? Or you're not absorbing them, which is the same as not taking them. And so again, this is why cellular-based testing is so important, because you won't necessarily see that with blood work. One, you would have never known you were deficient with the blood work. And two, you won't see levels going up or down in the blood work to know. So this is one way, even in the absence of gastrointestinal symptoms in some clients, we can know that they have a GI issue. If they're being compliant and taking the nutrients that we've prescribed and we still see their levels are low, then we know that they're not absorbing it. And that leads us down a gut healing mission. And again, very often, a lot of these clients will be shown to have a condition called SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or SIFO, small intestinal fungal overgrowth, or perhaps be missing enzymes or have low stomach acid, or any number of other potential causes of malabsorption. Now, of course, you need to treat that root cause too. Make sure that that person is then absorbing and continue to prescribe the nutrients that they need. Most of the time when someone's not absorbing, they're not just going to have a vitamin D, E, and magnesium deficiency. Most of the time we'll see 8, 9, 10, up to 18 different vitamin and mineral deficiencies. I think that's the highest I've ever personally seen. Then it's clear they have malabsorption, whether they have symptoms or not, right? Sometimes in the event of an eating disorder, for example, or someone with a super low appetite and they're just not hungry and maybe they're only eating once a day, or they're super busy and stressed and they're only eating once a day, maybe we'll see 10, 11 vitamin deficiencies, but even then 18 is a bit much, right? So if someone's not eating enough and they have malabsorption, then we might see 18, 19 plus vitamin and mineral deficiencies. So then we'll know to test them right away. This is why in my 20 years of practicing, I've really come to be a believer in cellular-based testing and also the foundational principles of well-being, what I call the 4 pillars of wellness. that I use in my 9-week transformation program for burnout resolution. So knowing your dynamic metabolic type is super important for this, because if you have a deficient dynamic metabolic type, right? So let's say you've done our burnout assessment and you now know your dynamic metabolic type is either a hot deficient, a cold deficient, or a temperature neutral deficient. You're more likely to be the one with all the vitamin and mineral deficiencies, for example, as opposed to someone with an excess dynamic metabolic type. So those with hot excess, cold excess, or temperature neutral excess don't have as many vitamin and mineral deficiencies as those with the deficiency dynamic metabolic types. So these are the people that are supported with eating more frequent meals, small frequent meals, because the likelihood that you're not absorbing is a bit higher. And even hormone deficiencies sometimes are higher. Vitamins and minerals are essential for hormone formation and production. So when I developed the idea of the 6 dynamic metabolic types, it came from the pandemic and not being able to see my clients in person. So I had to question them to see what dynamic metabolic type they were, so that I could then give them suggestions online of how to apply their dynamic metabolic type to the 4 pillars of wellness so they could get out of their burnout or exhaustion or fatigue. So then I realized that I could do a program that was completely online and self-driven. And this is where the idea of self-empowerment comes in. That was always one of the frustrations that I had, is that I wanted to teach my clients to be self-sufficient, right? I wanted to render myself obsolete in a certain way, because that's where you're most effective as a physician, is when you can teach your clients to know, this is what I need to do to keep myself healthy, right? There's only so much we can do at the office. You can come in and get your physicals, get your blood work done. You can have your routine screening. We can do cellular-based testing in the functional world. We can prescribe herbs and acupuncture in the integrative world and do all these really neat things. But if those things are not supported by your 4 pillars of wellness, according to your dynamic metabolic type, you leave this gaping hole in the foundation of your well-being. Because if you're not eating properly for your dynamic metabolic type, if you're not exercising properly for your dynamic metabolic type, you're not resting sufficiently for your metabolic type, and you're not detoxing properly for your metabolic type, that leaves a foundational gap that no supplements are going to fix. And so this is why I call them the 4 pillars of wellness. They're like the legs of a table. If they're not stable, you can't put anything on top of the table, right? So that's where the supplements come. They're the stuff on top of the table, but the foundation of the table has to be there. So when you're looking at a supplement label, how can you tell? Where do you begin? The first place I tell people to look is not at the actual ingredients label, but at the other ingredients that are below the ingredients label. That's the first place I would start. Before I ever look at what vitamins or minerals are actually in this vitamin, I look at what else is in this vitamin, because that's the most important thing, believe it or not. So if you see things other than methyl cellulose, for example, or magnesium stearate, or other what we call inert non-toxic fillers, you do not want to buy it. If you see food coloring, any numbers and things like that, yellow number 5 and red number whatever, put it down. If you can't pronounce it, put it down. And if you see more than about 3 other ingredients, put it down. It's not the supplement you want to take. Then, once you've gone through that process, now you look at the actual ingredients. Does it have vitamin A, all the B vitamins, vitamin C, D, E? Does it have multi-minerals, right? Does it have selenium, copper, zinc, magnesium, calcium, chromium? Does it have antioxidant? And most multivitamins don't have antioxidants in them. They might have a few, like selenium is an antioxidant, vitamin E is an antioxidant, but most multivitamins will not have, for example, glutathione or cysteine, CoQ10, lipoic acid, and other really vital antioxidants. Vitamin C is an antioxidant that you'll find in the vast majority of most multiple vitamins. The next thing to look at in a label is what percentage of the recommended daily allowance is in the capsule. If it says 100% all the way down, it's not your multivitamin, especially if you know yourself to have vitamin and mineral deficiencies. The recommended daily allowance is about 70 years old, or maybe more now. It's just not accurate. It doesn't represent today's nutritional demands. There's so much more stress now. There's so much more go, go, go. We don't get as much sleep. Our food quality is even worse than it used to be 70 years ago, much worse, in fact. And so our vitamin and mineral and antioxidant demands have skyrocketed, whereas the recommended daily allowance has stayed the same. And so if it says 100% or less, put it down. That's not your vitamin. You need to be on the ones that have, sometimes they'll say thousands of percentages of the recommended daily allowance. Again, you want to be tested to know, do I need just a generic multivitamin that's just going to kind of give me a little extra something to keep me healthy? Or do I actually have vitamin and mineral deficiencies that I need to correct, right? That's a whole other multivitamin. That's a much more robust multivitamin. And you're going to need additional single nutrients to complement what your test results show. So if you have CoQ10 deficiency, glutathione deficiency, lipoic acid deficiency, or cysteine deficiencies, vast majority of multivitamins will not have those nutrients in them. And so you'd have to add them separately. And again, you have to add them in a form that is highly absorbable. Glutathione is very difficult to absorb in an oral form, as is B12. So if you know that you have a B12 deficiency, taking a capsule isn't going to be as useful as taking a sublingual, for example, holding it under your tongue and letting it get absorbed through the veins in the back. Glutathione is very similar. And so for people that I know have malabsorption, I'll often prescribe a glutathione transdermal cream so it gets absorbed through the skin instead of relying on the gut that's not working as well. So looking at the label is super important, and knowing how many capsules to take that give you what's on the label. And then vet your manufacturer, know who they are. Again, getting a consultation with a functional medical doctor, even if it's just to get like a list of really solid supplements from solid manufacturers where you can get a sense of who's reliable, that would be a huge advantage. And then the next thing is to know, am I going to absorb this multivitamin and these supplements? There is testing for us to know that, right? You can have your pancreatic elastase tested. You can have fat absorption markers, protein absorption markers, carb absorption markers looked at so that you know if you're absorbing those things. But there really is no vitamin and mineral absorption marker other than a cellular-based vitamin and mineral test that lets you know if you're deficient or not. So what I've noted over the years in doing stool analyses to look at malabsorption, I'll sometimes have clients where their stool test doesn't show that their absorption markers are off, but they have a ton of vitamin and mineral deficiencies anyway, because the test is not sensitive enough to detect those. So usually coupling the stool test with a vitamin and mineral test that's cellular based will give you the most information. Now, if you have pancreatic enzyme deficiencies, the first question is, why do I have these deficiencies, right? And then the second thing is to supplement with enzymes until you find the root cause and you correct it. So that could be infections, inflammation, the type of food you're eating, any number of other potential things. So you want to make sure that you get that checked out and corrected from a root cause perspective, and support yourself with digestive enzymes in the meanwhile. Also leads us to those supplements. So what's up with the digestive enzymes? So for me, I usually have to combine 2 different digestive enzymes and ask my clients to take them with each meal, because no, just like multivitamins, right? There's only so much you can shove into a multivitamin, which actually I want to go back a little bit and talk about the multivitamin one more time. Minerals are very challenging to put in a multivitamin. So especially calcium. Calcium does not play nice with the other vitamins and minerals. So the top end manufacturers will not put very much calcium in their vitamin because they understand that. So when you're looking at your label, you should look for the vitamins to have quite a bit above the recommended daily allowance. When it comes to the minerals, that's not necessarily the case, because the minerals can actually make the vitamins harder to absorb. And so if you do have mineral deficiencies, if you're not getting enough from the multivitamin, your functional medical doctor or practitioner should be able to prescribe minerals. And also you can take things like sea salt. Now you want to be very careful. The cleanest brand for me that I recommend to my clients is the Celtic brand that has the fewest contaminants in it. Because salt is mined from the earth, there will be natural contaminants in the salt no matter how you try to process it. So the cleanest one that I have found so far anyway is Celtic. So having just a little quarter turn of sea salt in your water is really very good for correcting nutrient deficiencies. So now back to the stool sample that may show enzyme deficiencies. Not every digestive enzyme is created equally, right? So we want to make sure we have a very robust enzyme supplement. And that usually, for me personally, when I test my clients, that's two digestive enzymes that I combine into one. The vast majority of the time, my clients who have malabsorption have infection. In fact, probably 90% of people who are not absorbing well have SIBO or SIFO, small intestinal fungal overgrowth, or bacterial. And so when we're trying to support their digestion and absorption while we're treating the infection, we have to use things that are called bile salts in the digestive enzymes because the bacteria that actually cause SIBO deactivate your own bile salts. And so as you're eating, you have to have those bile salts in your food so that you're able to break them down properly before the bacteria get to them. And so making sure that you're taking a digestive enzyme that has enzymes to break down proteins, fats, and carbs, you also want to make sure they have bile salts. And so that usually comes in the form of two different capsules that I ask my clients to take with their meals. And again, there are lots of really great manufacturers. Check in with your functional doctor to see what brands they use. And again, you can exercise your empowerment, right? Call the manufacturer, send them an email and say, I'd like to see where you're getting your stuff from. Can you send me additional literature so I can see how you're sourcing the ingredients of your nutrients? And you'd have to tell them specifically which one so they can send you that specific brochure. And there are lots of really great manufacturers, and not all of them are created equal. Now, I tell people the typical things you'll find at the pharmacy, the grocery store, they're not going to be the highest quality. And so most high-end manufacturers of supplements sell them through the prescribing physicians or practitioners. The reason for that is so that you don't have what I call like the health food store shock, right? You walk into the store and your head just starts to spin because there's so many different brands and the labels are different and you don't quite know where to begin. And so we specifically prescribe the brand, how much to take. Everything is there so that you don't get that shock of having to try and figure it out on your own. And most of my private clients who come in have tried that. They've been there, done that. They've tried everything they can on their own. And the bottom line is, without the proper testing, the proper guidance, there's only so far you can get. Now, your empowerment comes from what you do with that information, right? How you apply that to every moment of your day, how you live intentionally and be present with every moment. Something as simple as how you breathe and how you focus on the food that you're eating with intention. Intention that it nourishes your body, intention that it nourishes your mind, and the gratitude of having access to that. And gratitude for all of the different organ systems that complement your metabolism, that make it flow. That puts you in a really positive mindset that really gives you like just that extra secret sauce that makes things so much more useful. So your intention matters. So self-empowerment is all about how do I go through my day in an empowered, high vibrating state so that everything that I'm doing is leading me down a path of recovery from burnout or a path of prevention of disease, a path of joy and well-being. So the biggest takeaways from today, don't believe the hype with the medical studies. Make sure you really take a look at them. The real study is your own experience, your cellular testing, your metabolic testing matched to your symptoms, and the correction of those things through the proper supplementation, proper brands, the proper doses. And then the end result, which is you should feel better. Your symptoms should not be masked, but should actually be better because what the testing showed is now resolved, right? So you have the before and the after picture. That's the study. And then empowering yourself once you've kind of gone through that process to stay out of that again, to prevent it from recurring, right? To have those foundations solidly under your belt and to know how to apply your dynamic metabolic type to your 4 pillars of wellness so that your foundation is set so you don't have those cracks in it that allow those processes to recur. That way you can thrive in your life, your career, do all the things you love. And nothing makes me happier than having a client walk back into the office to say that they feel better. Not just that they feel better, but now they know why they didn't feel better. And they feel empowered to know how they can keep that momentum going in their lives, to do the things that they love, and to, most importantly, love themselves. And that's the biggest takeaway today, is always start with you. making sure that you're on solid ground before you give of yourself. Again, that's not selfish, that's self-care. So I hope you found today's podcast to be helpful and applicable in your life. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. If you're listening to this on our other podcast distribution channels, please share this with those that you love and those that you think would benefit the most. Comment below your biggest takeaway. I'd really love to know if you found this to be valuable, what the takeaway points were for you, and please let me know what other topics you'd like me to cover. I'm here to make sure that you get what you need to empower yourself to live your best life burnout free. If you haven't taken our burnout assessment yet, we keep upgrading it and making it better. So now it includes a burnout risk assessment in addition to letting you know what your dynamic metabolic type is and how to apply it to your 4 pillars. So if you haven't taken it yet, visit our website, awakenedwellnessnow.com. You can follow us on Instagram at awakenedwellnessnow. If you want to know about our Wellness Warrior 9-week transformation program, you can watch our training on our website as well. If you want to know about our corporate offerings, please connect with me on LinkedIn. I'll be happy to share our corporate burnout assessment tool with you and help you start empowering your team members to live their best lives so that that can translate into the well-being of your business and corporation. Happy team members, happy business, happy customers. So thanks for listening. I'm your host, Dr. And until next time, many, many blessings.